So, they're back, again. And this time, it's not a podcast, not a Netflix docuseries, not a sit-down special, but a gala. Because what better way to make a grand return than under soft lighting, designer gowns, and a carpet full of flashing cameras? When the royal duo walked into the Project Healthy Minds Gala, it was like déjà vu for the entire internet. Every headline screamed about their powerful return, every camera zoomed in on every blink, and every fan account was already cropping out the background to make it look even more glamorous. But the real question floating through everyone's mind wasn't, what are they supporting? It was, why now? You see, for a couple who spent the last few years telling us how toxic the spotlight is, they sure seem to know exactly where it's shining. And the timing? Let's just say it couldn't have been more strategic. The gala's theme, mental health and awareness, sounds noble, important. And to be fair, it truly is. But let's not ignore the elephant wearing a designer tux in the room. This event also marked a major image revival moment for the Sussex brand, because lately, things haven't exactly been picture perfect. The public sympathy that once flooded in after the royal exit has, well, thinned out a little. The documentaries, interviews, tell-alls, they all made waves. But over time, people started asking, what's next? So, when Meghan and Harry stepped back into the spotlight, perfectly polished, perfectly coordinated, and perfectly humble in front of the cameras, it felt less like a random appearance and more like a planned reintroduction. The thing is, comebacks are tricky. They rely on two things, timing and tone. Come back too early, and it looks desperate. Come back too late, and people move on. But come back under the guise of mental health advocacy, and suddenly it's not about you, it's about the cause. And that's where this event hit differently. It wasn't just a gala. It was a reset button, disguised as philanthropy. You could almost feel the rebranding energy in the air, from the carefully crafted speeches to the soft, empathetic handholds that conveniently happened when the cameras were rolling. This was a moment of image control done the royal way, with just enough sincerity to look organic, and just enough shine to trend on Twitter. Of course, fans noticed, because the internet always notices. Some praised them for stepping out again, for facing the public, for putting the focus on mental health after months of silence. Others weren't as convinced. They called it too polished, too rehearsed, too PR, too everything. And honestly, who could blame them? Over the past few years, every time Meghan and Harry go quiet, it feels like they're gearing up for a new rollout, a new series, a new initiative, a new speech about how they're misunderstood, yet determined to keep using their voices. So when they appeared at this gala, some people rolled their eyes, others raised their brows, and the rest just grabbed popcorn. Because if there's one thing this couple knows how to do, it's make an entrance. Now, let's be real. The optics were beautiful. The speeches were inspiring. The quotes were carefully crafted to be social media friendly. We're all in this together. Let's break the stigma. We need to talk more about mental health. All the right words, said in all the right ways. But beneath the polished surface, something felt familiar. Like we'd seen this movie before, the one where the message is heartfelt, but the delivery feels like a trailer for something bigger. And that's where the conversation shifted. Because the internet didn't just see a couple supporting mental health awareness, they saw a brand revival campaign in full swing. Think about it. Every move, every smile, every subtle headline after the gala seemed to lead to the same thing. The Sussexes are back. It was the kind of coverage that PR dreams are made of. But here's the twist. Not everyone was buying it. For some, this comeback felt a little too perfectly timed, arriving just when their public favor had cooled, when Netflix projects had quieted down, and when media interest was starting to fade. Suddenly, boom. New photos, new interviews, new causes. And while there's nothing wrong with wanting to reset your public image, the internet has become incredibly good at spotting patterns. People notice when something feels rehearsed. When every shot looks like it belongs in a coffee table book. When the smiles look just a little too practiced. Because here's the truth about fame in 2025. Authenticity sells. And if people sense that something's a little too polished, a little too calculated, they pull back. And that's where this return to the spotlight becomes so fascinating. Because it's not just about Meghan and Harry anymore, it's about how celebrity image works in the age of overexposure. They wanted to control the narrative. But the narrative keeps evolving without them. Each time they step back into view, the internet doesn't just watch, it judges. Every gesture becomes a meme. Every headline becomes a thread. Every quote becomes a reaction video. And the question that lingers after each appearance isn't, what did they say? It's, what are they planning next? So this gala wasn't just a reappearance. It was a test to see if people were ready to embrace them again, to listen, to forget the past drama and focus on the cause. But judging by the reactions online, it seems like opinions are split right down the middle. Some fans are convinced it's their redemption arc, that they've turned a corner, grown from the chaos, and are ready to genuinely contribute. Others think it's the same playbook, different event, a glossy new chapter of the same old PR saga, and that's what makes this moment so watchable. Because love them or not, Meghan and Harry have mastered one thing: staying relevant. They know how to disappear just long enough for people to miss them, and then return with a story that feels just personal enough to spark curiosity, just public enough to dominate headlines, and just mysterious enough to keep everyone guessing. So while the cameras captured smiles and speeches, the audience, both in the room and online, saw something else. A carefully crafted comeback, a polished attempt to reclaim the spotlight while pretending not to want it. And that irony? That's what keeps people watching. Because whether it's admiration or frustration, everyone's still talking. And in celebrity culture, that's the whole point. On a time, because every royal story has to start that way. There was an actress from Los Angeles who convinced the world she'd stumbled. Straight out of a Hallmark movie and into Buckingham Palace, Meghan Markle wasn't just living a fairy tale. She was producing one in high definition, full PR color, with a soundtrack of empowerment quotes and soft focus lighting. To the world, it was perfection. The divorced American actress who broke centuries of royal tradition and modernized the monarchy. The feminist who won the prince. The underdog who rewrote history. But behind the sparkly headlines and picture-perfect engagement photos, there was one thing that made this story different from every royal romance before it. This wasn't destiny. It was branding. From the moment Meghan met Harry, everything about her story was calibrated for impact. Remember that famous engagement interview? The candlelight, the giggles, the "we were set up by a friend"? That wasn't just romantic. That was cinematic. Every line felt rehearsed, every glance perfectly timed. And yet the public ate it up, because we wanted to believe it. We wanted to believe in the modern princess narrative. The idea that you could work hard, wear Givenchy, and land a prince and a People's Choice Award for Most Inspirational Human of the Year. The story was irresistible. The press called it a love story for the ages. But let's be honest, it was more like a marketing campaign for the ages. Meghan didn't just step into royal life. She introduced herself to it. Everything, from her wardrobe choices to her speeches to her perfectly timed tears during interviews, was part of a bigger performance. And for a while, it worked flawlessly. She was the relatable royal, the every girl who also happened to own a wardrobe, worth a small country's GDP, the woman who spoke about authenticity while every move around her was choreographed down to the lighting. Let's take a moment to appreciate the rollout strategy here. First came the engagement, a fairy tale proposal, complete with roasted chicken and fairy lights. Then came the wedding, global, diverse, historic, and oh so tearfully modern. The gospel choir, the preacher, the solo walk down the aisle, it was everything traditional royal watchers didn't expect. And that's why it went viral, and Meghan knew it. Every frame, every headline, every hashtag perfectly aligned with her personal brand. Empowerment meets elegance, disruption meets Dior. For someone who'd spent years in Hollywood, she understood the value of optics better than most royal insiders ever could. She wasn't just entering an institution, she was rebranding it. And the palace? At first they loved it. The Meghan effect was real. Dresses sold out within hours. Charities saw record donations. And royal coverage had never looked so diverse and globally appealing. She was the PR dream until the dream started developing cracks, because here's the thing about a fairy tale built on image. It only lasts as long as the lighting holds. The same media that once praised her confidence started calling her controlling. The modern duchess turned into diva duchess. And every glowing headline suddenly had an asterisk. But before it all unraveled, let's rewind to how perfectly this story was constructed. When Meghan entered the royal family, her public persona was already a work of art. She'd been polishing it for years. From her Tig blog days, remember the lifestyle guru era, to her humanitarian appearances on red carpets. She understood how to blend sincerity with sophistication, and she knew how to speak the language of aspiration. On camera, she was calm, articulate, endlessly likable. Behind the scenes, she was strategic, choosing alliances, shaping narratives, managing perception. She wasn't the damsel waiting to be chosen. She was the director, editor, and lead actress of her own royal production, and that's where the genius and irony lies. Meghan managed to make a centuries-old institution look like a backdrop for her story. It wasn't the royal family featuring Meghan Markle. It was Meghan Markle featuring the royal family. That's not an insult. That's branding brilliance. But it also explains why the palace started sweating bullets behind those castle walls. Because suddenly, the narrative wasn't royalty embraces progress. It was royalty bends to Meghan. And if there's one thing the royal machine can't stand, it's losing control of the story. The wedding was supposed to unite the family's image. Instead, it divided the public into camps. Those who saw Meghan as a symbol of modern change, and those who saw her as a headline-chasing opportunist. And like any great PR war, both sides came armed. Supporters saw her as the woman who brought compassion to the crown. Critics saw her as the actress who turned royal duty into a global brand. But in the middle of that noise stood Meghan, perfectly composed, speaking softly about kindness and mindfulness, while the world argued over whether she was a visionary or a villain. That duality, that polished calm in the middle of chaos, became her signature. Even as stories leaked about staff quitting, feuds forming, and crying at fittings, pick a side, any side, Meghan stayed on message. She was misunderstood, mistreated, and most importantly, still standing strong. It was the perfect heroine arc. Every obstacle became another step in her resilience journey. Every headline that tried to take her down became proof of how brave she was. And to her credit, she played it flawlessly, because in the age of social media, perception is everything. And Meghan knew exactly how to turn perception into power. She didn't fight the press. She redefined the battlefield. When tabloids criticized her, she went to Oprah. When the palace pushed back, she launched a podcast. When the public questioned her authenticity, she doubled down on speaking her truth. Every move was a counter-move. Every criticism, a new opportunity to reinforce the image of the misunderstood modern woman. And the beauty of it? It worked for a while. The fairy tale was still intact, even as the castle walls started shaking. The public still wanted to believe in the narrative. Because deep down, we all love a story about reinvention, especially when it's dressed in designer empathy. But like every fairy tale, there comes a moment when the magic starts to fade, when the glass slipper pinches, and the castle gates don't look so welcoming anymore. And that moment for Meghan came when the world realized something uncomfortable. The fairy tale wasn't just about love or freedom or breaking barriers. It was about control. She wasn't just living happily ever after. She was directing happily ever after. Every image, every story, every carefully chosen interview, all part of the grand production. It's not that the fairy tale was fake. It's that it was too perfect, too curated, too self-aware. Because real fairy tales don't come with PR teams and global streaming deals. But Meghan's did. And while the world was mesmerized by the sparkle, the story behind the scenes was starting to shift. The modern duchess image was cracking. The narrative was losing shine. And suddenly, people weren't sure if they were watching a fairy tale or a rebrand in crisis. The reality check. The moment the glitter started to fall off the crown, and the modern fairy tale started looking more like a PR horror film. By the time the world had gotten used to saying the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Meghan and Harry were already halfway out the royal gates, waving goodbye with one hand and holding a Netflix contract in the other. Let's be honest. At first, their step back from royal duties sounded reasonable. "We just want privacy," they said. "We want a simpler life," they insisted. And for a split second, people actually believed them. How noble! A prince and his wife choosing love and mental health over titles and tiaras. Cue the applause, right? Except it didn't take long before the privacy seekers started showing up everywhere except private. Their grand exit from the royal family, now famously dubbed Megxit, was pitched as a move toward independence. But instead of retreating quietly into a peaceful cottage in Canada, they landed smack in the middle of Hollywood, the literal capital of flashing cameras, staged authenticity, and brand deals. privacy apparently meant trading royal protocol for red carpets and primetime interviews. The first major sign that things weren't quite as innocent as they seemed came with the Oprah interview. Oh yes, that 2-hour television therapy session that broke the internet and allegedly shook Buckingham Palace. Meghan's narrative was perfectly packaged. The outsider who just wanted to love her man, but the cold, outdated, emotionally repressed institution wouldn't let her breathe. Now, don't get it twisted. The royal family is not exactly a beacon of modern empathy, but Meghan's delivery was Oscar level. She hit every emotional cue perfectly. The tears, the pauses, the pregnant silences, the "I just didn't want to live anymore" moment, all timed with cinematic precision. And Oprah, bless her empire, sat there with her "what?" and "you're kidding" face like she was hosting The Crown. Live edition. The problem wasn't that Meghan opened up. The problem was how fast the story turned from personal pain to full-blown global brand launch. Overnight, Harry and Meghan wasn't just a couple, it was a media empire in the making. They trademarked Archewell. They signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. They hired PR teams that could make even the Kardashians blush. This wasn't a quiet rebellion, it was a rebranding. And yet, the irony of it all? Every new public move completely contradicted the privacy narrative they built their exit on. They went from, "we don't want attention," to curating their own public image. One documentary, one podcast, one confessional at a time. Meghan's Spotify series Archetypes was pitched as a deep dive into labels and stereotypes women face. But for many listeners, it felt like a masterclass in Meghan explaining Meghan, with a sprinkle of feminist buzzwords and a touch of, "remember what they did to me." Meanwhile, Harry's memoir Spare arrived like emotional shrapnel. Every chapter seemed to be a new shot fired at his family, the tabloids, and basically anyone who didn't buy into their us against the world storyline. It was raw, yes, but it was also exhausting. Even die-hard royal watchers started to wonder if Harry was healing or just monetizing his trauma. Here's the part that really stung for many people. It wasn't just about what they said, it was how often they said it. Every few months, a new revelation, a new documentary, a new interview. The line between vulnerability and victimhood started to blur. And with every new appearance, Meghan's once glowing image dimmed a little more. The press, who once couldn't get enough of her, started turning skeptical. Headlines shifted from Meghan the modernizer to Meghan the manipulator. Even some of her old Hollywood allies began to quietly distance themselves. Suddenly, the couple who once seemed unstoppable were now the punchline of late-night jokes and the subject of public fatigue. And Meghan's approach didn't help. Every public move had an undercurrent of control, a sense that every angle, every outfit, every line was meticulously rehearsed. Authenticity turned into performance. And while that might work in a rom-com, in real life, people can smell the script from a mile away. Then came the South Park episode. Oh, the cultural thermometer moment. When the world's sharpest satirist roasted you as the Prince and Princess of Canada going on a world privacy tour, it wasn't just a jab. It was a reflection of how the public truly saw them. Tone deaf, performative, and maybe just a little too addicted to the attention they claimed to hate. To make matters worse, the very platforms they bet their brand on began turning their backs. Spotify executives publicly mocked their content deals. Netflix reportedly grew impatient with their creative direction, and media. Analysts started labeling their empire as struggling to find relevance. Even the once sympathetic U.S. media began shifting tone. The same outlets that had championed Meghan as the brave truth-teller now published op-eds asking if she'd overplayed her hand. Was Meghan too Hollywood for royalty? Or just not royal enough for Hollywood? One headline read, "Ouch." And Harry. Well, poor Harry looked increasingly like a man caught between two worlds, the old system he escaped and the new one he doesn't quite control. While Meghan steered their brand into activism and glossy production deals, Harry seemed stuck narrating his trauma on loop. It's almost tragic. The prince who wanted freedom now seems trapped in his own narrative. But perhaps the biggest reality check wasn't media backlash. It was the public's loss of interest. Because in the end, that's the real death of celebrity influence. Not hate, not scandal, indifference. When audiences stopped caring, the whole operation started to look desperate. Every new announcement felt like an attempt to stay in the headlines rather than a meaningful move forward. Meghan, once hailed as a symbol of progress, found herself being seen as a symbol of overexposure. Her every appearance drew scrutiny, every speech dissected for ulterior motives. What started as a mission to challenge the monarchy turned into an endless PR treadmill. And the saddest part? They could have been icons of change, if only they'd stopped trying so hard to control the narrative. So, the fairy tale cracked, not because of villains in Buckingham Palace or cruel tabloids, though both played their part, but because, at some point, the protagonists forgot the difference between telling their story and selling it. In the end, the reality check wasn't just for Meghan and Harry, it was for all of us. A reminder that even the most romantic rebellion can turn hollow when fame becomes the goal and not the byproduct. Because once the cameras turn off, privacy isn't a brand, it's a choice. And somewhere between Oprah and Netflix, Meghan and Harry forgot to make it. There's always that one moment in every public saga, the exact point where admiration curdles into eye-rolling, and the applause quietly turns into, okay, that's enough. For Meghan and Harry, that turning point wasn't one single event. It was death by 1,000 headlines, one overplayed victim card at a time. Remember, when they first broke away from the royals, people wanted to root for them. Seriously, the world was ready to watch this beautiful, mixed-race modern couple stick it to an outdated institution. The narrative was electric. Love conquers tradition, empathy over etiquette, authenticity over stiff royal scripts. They had everyone, from Oprah to teenagers on TikTok, ready to carry that torch. But somewhere between the interviews, documentaries, podcasts, and memoirs, the message turned into noise. Loud, repetitive, overly curated noise. The same truth told a dozen times, just with different lighting, different producers, and slightly more dramatic background music. And the public? The same one that had once defended Meghan like she was the second coming of Princess Diana, began to notice a pattern, one that screamed performative sincerity. At first, it was subtle. Comments under their videos and articles began to shift. I supported them at first, but this is getting tiring. Do they even want privacy? Why are they still talking about the family they supposedly left behind? What once sounded like courage began to sound like complaining. And let's face it, there's nothing less glamorous than a celebrity who won't stop talking about how hard fame is. While living in a $14 million Montecito mansion with a personal staff and Netflix cameras in the driveway, even fans who adored Meghan started to cringe when she spoke about healing and truth, because by the 10th PR campaign, it felt more like a marketing hook than a personal revelation. People began asking the uncomfortable question, was this all ever really about freedom, or was it about building the Sussex brand? The Netflix docuseries was the big one, the grand reveal, the final word. Except it wasn't. It was 6 hours of perfectly lit victimhood, every frame looking like it came straight from a Vogue shoot. You'd think they were launching a Dior campaign rather than sharing their raw truth. Every shot was symbolic, the fog over Frogmore Cottage, the slow-motion hand-holding, the wistful glances out of luxury windows. It was beautiful, and completely tone-deaf, because while they were crying about oppression from the comfort of a California palace, the world outside was dealing with inflation, wars, and economic crises. People weren't in the mood for millionaires complaining about emotional trauma while wearing designer cashmere. And then, just to add some insult to their own injury, the South Park episode dropped. A moment so perfectly timed it almost felt like karma had a sense of humor. The Prince and Princess of Canada on a world privacy tour became an instant meme. And you know what? The fact that everyone, conservatives, liberals, royalists, and Meghan stans alike, laughed at it told you everything. It wasn't just a joke. It was a cultural verdict. South Park didn't create that image. It reflected it. By then, the public had already made up its mind. Meghan and Harry weren't rebels anymore. They were attention addicts dressed up as activists. And when Spotify's Bill Simmons, one of the most influential figures in the podcast world, called them fucking grifters, it wasn't just media gossip. It was confirmation that the industry that once courted them was now collectively rolling its eyes. That quote went viral not because of the insult, but because it echoed what the public already thought but hadn't said out loud. Even the timing of their appearances became suspicious. Every time a royal event or major British moment hit the news, boom, Meghan and Harry somehow had a new interview, a new statement, or a conveniently timed leak. Coincidence? Please, it became so predictable that even fans joked about it. By the time Spare dropped, the sympathy tank was empty. The book was supposed to humanize Harry, to show the world his pain. And in some ways, it did. The childhood trauma, the loneliness, the emotional neglect. But then came the bizarre oversharing. Frostbitten body parts, physical fights with William, drug use, and every private detail nobody asked for. It went from relatable to ridiculous fast. Instead of painting himself as a man reclaiming his voice, Harry started to look like a man addicted to the spotlight he claimed to despise. The very machine he'd run from, the tabloids, he was now feeding with his own words. And as for Meghan, the more she spoke, the more detached she seemed from the reality most people lived in. Every public moment looked staged. Every candid photo looked coordinated. Her speeches on compassion sounded corporate. Her feminist takes felt recycled. And her tone-deaf comparisons, like comparing her wedding to Nelson Mandela's release, just made things worse. The tipping point wasn't hate, it was fatigue. Audiences stopped engaging, stopped defending, and started scrolling. Meghan and Harry had become that couple, the ones who think every dinner conversation needs to be about them, their struggles, their truth. Even Hollywood started to move on. Invitations slowed down. Major studios, who once would have killed for their involvement, began quietly pulling away. Why? Because the Sussex shine no longer sold. They'd gone from royal rebels to brand liability. And when archetypes got cancelled and Netflix reportedly grew disappointed with their performance, it became painfully clear that the industry saw what the public did. The act was old. The brand had burned out. Their attendance at events like the Project Healthy Minds Gala and the Invictus Games looked like attempts to recapture old goodwill, but the reaction was muted. People weren't booing. They just weren't caring. And that, in celebrity culture, is the true downfall. The media narrative had flipped completely. They weren't underdogs anymore. They were opportunists. And for Meghan especially, that shift was brutal. Her every move was now read through a lens of suspicion. If she smiled, it was fake. If she stayed silent, it was strategic. The same woman who had once symbolized hope for progress was now being called Hollywood's most calculating duchess. And Harry, once the cheeky, relatable prince, became the husband who lost himself. The public began to pity him. Not hate, pity. Which, honestly, is far worse in the long run. But perhaps the saddest part of all this is how unnecessary it was. The world wanted to keep loving them. They had every opportunity to pivot, to rebuild their image through genuine philanthropy, quiet leadership, or meaningful work. Instead, they doubled down on telling and retelling their truth until it became background noise. So the public's turning point wasn't just about betrayal, it was about exhaustion. People didn't stop caring because they hated Meghan and Harry. They stopped caring because the story never evolved. Every villain needs a redemption arc. Every rebel needs a cause. But Meghan and Harry, they never seemed to realize their fight ended long ago, and the audience had moved on to the next act. Now, when you see them on a red carpet or in a carefully worded press release, it's not inspiring, it's predictable. The couple who once stood for breaking free from the system now look like they're desperately trying to stay relevant within the one they built themselves. And that, right there, was the public's turning point, when the story stopped being about courage and started being about content. So, after all the interviews, the specials, the headlines, and the side-eye from the internet, where does the famous couple actually stand? Publicly, they've entered what commentators call their soft reset era. The frenzy has cooled, the daily royal drama cycle has moved on, and now the two are quietly reshaping what their post-palace identity even means. Their Montecito base remains home. Think manicured gardens, California calm, and a schedule that mixes charity appearances with new media brainstorming sessions. Behind the scenes, their team has been reevaluating what kind of projects can actually rebuild goodwill. The original strategy, telling their story again and again, hit its limit. The new focus seems to be credibility. Projects with clear impact, fewer cameras, and more results. Harry's lane is the Invictus Games and veteran support work, which still earns him genuine respect. Every time the games happen, people are reminded that, stripped of titles and headlines, he can deliver something meaningful. His recent public speeches have been noticeably calmer, less defensive, and more practical, about rehabilitation, community, and purpose rather than grievance. Meghan's lane looks different. She's been testing how to re-enter lifestyle and media in a way that feels aspirational, but not preachy. Industry watchers say her new company, focused on cooking, home, and wellness, signals a pivot from confession to curation. If the earlier chapters were about survival, this one aims for reinvention, the polished domestic CEO, rather than the misunderstood duchess. Still, the audience relationship is complicated. In the United States, sentiment sits somewhere in the middle. People don't dislike them, but the mystique has faded. In the United Kingdom, public warmth hasn't exactly rebounded, though the outrage has cooled into mild curiosity. On social media, commentary now runs less scandalous and more meh. For a pair once treated like global icons, indifference might be the hardest headline of all. Business-wise, they remain financially comfortable. Their Netflix and book deals gave them a long runway, even if some partnerships fizzled. Yet Hollywood learned a lesson too. Fame alone isn't a sustainable pitch. To stay relevant, they'll need consistent wins that feel earned, not inherited. The good news? The fatigue that once surrounded them can flip into opportunity. Public memory resets fast, especially online. A couple of strong philanthropic projects or a successful creative venture could easily shift the narrative again. Viewers love a comeback almost as much as a controversy, and there are signs of a smarter PR rhythm. Instead of commentating on royal life, they now let the palace do its thing while they build separate identities. The fewer comparisons drawn, the better for everyone. Their teams have learned that silence, used strategically, can do more for reputation than any interview ever could. From a storytelling standpoint, this phase is about stabilization. The hero versus villain frame no longer sells. What does sell is transformation. Can a couple who once dominated headlines now quietly succeed on their own terms? That's the question audiences are curious to see answered. Some brand analysts suggest they follow the blueprint of other public figures who rebuilt trust, lean into measurable charity outcomes, collaborate with credible partners, stay authentic but disciplined with exposure. Basically, less confession, more contribution. If that happens, their image could mature into something far healthier. No longer ex-royals running from a crown, but global advocates who finally stopped explaining and started doing. In the meantime, every appearance, every statement, every project serves as a test. The fascination might have dimmed, but it hasn't disappeared. People still click. They still comment. They still want to know how this story ends. And maybe that's the quiet truth of their current standing. They're no longer the protagonists of a fairy tale or the antagonists of a feud. They're case studies in modern celebrity, how fame morphs, how narratives spin, and how two people try to regain control of their own headlines in a world that never stops writing them. So, here we are. After years of interviews, confessions, and documentaries, the glittering fairy tale that once had the world hooked has turned into something else entirely. Not a love story, not a tragedy, more like a never-ending season of reality TV, with new plot twists, rewrites, and side characters entering every few months, whether we asked for them or not. Because let's face it, what started as the modern royal revolution somehow ended up feeling like keeping up with the Montecito royals. Somewhere between the palace gates and the podcast studio, the plot lost direction. And yet, here we still are, watching, scrolling, clicking, because no matter how much people claim they're so over it, the curiosity never really dies, does it? Now, let's be fair. They've pulled off something not many could, escaping the institution, building a new brand from scratch, and cashing in enough streaming deals to make Netflix's stockholders smile, for a minute anyway. But for every big move, there's been a bigger backlash. For every heartfelt speech, a meme waiting in the comment section. That's the world they helped create, where image and reality are a full-time job, and every PR strategy is one headline away from chaos. And somewhere between the tears, the tell-alls, and the talk of truth, people started asking a different question. Was it ever really about freedom, or was it always about control? Because when you look closely, their story isn't about breaking away from power. It's about reinventing it. See, the palace might have written the first version of their script, but they've been the directors ever since, rewriting the narrative scene by scene, camera by camera. From the explosive interviews to the perfectly curated photo ops, every chapter has been choreographed to say one thing: we're not the villains. And yet, the audience is still debating who actually is. It's almost poetic, really. They left the world's most famous family for peace and privacy, and then spent 4 years explaining that decision to the entire planet. You can't make this stuff up. Oh wait, maybe you can, if you've got a Netflix deal and a good lighting setup. But behind the sarcasm, here's the twist that nobody talks about. Despite all the noise, they've changed the rules of the game. Love them or roll your eyes at them, you have to admit. They exposed what royal life really costs, not just in money, but in autonomy. They turned the royal PR machine inside out, and whether you think that's bravery or brand management, it worked. For a while, anyway. Now, the cameras are quieter, the headlines fewer, and the once constant drama feels recycled. Even the tabloids seem to have fatigue, and that's saying something. We're watching two people learning, maybe the hard way, that fame built on confession has an expiration date. You can only retell your truth so many times before people start asking for receipts. But hey, this is Hollywood 2.0. Reputations reboot faster than iPhones. A single successful project, one new cause, or even a red carpet moment can flip the script overnight. They've already proven they know how to capture attention. The next test? Holding it without controversy. Because, let's be real, the world has moved on to newer dramas. Billionaire divorces, celebrity feuds, and Fashion Week meltdowns. To stay relevant, they'll need more than nostalgia and old grievances. They'll need substance. Something even the critics can't side-eye away. And maybe, just maybe, that's where they're heading. After all, the spotlight isn't going anywhere. It just shifts. The trick isn't escaping it. It's learning to stand in it without burning out. Maybe that's the lesson this whole saga's been leading to. Not about royalty, fame, or even revenge, but about what happens when image becomes identity. How far people will go to control the story, and how hard it is to live once you've sold it. Because beneath the glitz, the drama, and the million-dollar branding, there's still just two people trying to make sense of a life that stopped being private a long time ago. And if you strip away the sarcasm, the documentaries, and the glossy interviews, what's left is actually something kind of human, messy, ambitious, complicated, and maybe still searching for peace that isn't made for the cameras. But hey, this is the internet, not therapy. And tomorrow, there'll be another headline, another hot take, another video dissecting what really happened at the next public appearance. Because as long as they keep showing up, we'll keep watching. It's the modern deal of fame. You can't escape the stage when you built it yourself, so maybe the next time they say they're stepping back, we'll believe it when we see it. Until then, we'll be right here, sipping our tea, waiting for the next act of the world's most dramatic royal reboot. Because if there's one thing we've learned, fairy tales may fade, but the sequel? It always finds a way to drop right when the views start dipping. Cue the next chapter, roll the credits. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because if history has taught us anything, this story's never really over.